Okay. Thank you all for coming. I know it's a hard choice between coffee at the sun or the beach and staying at the conference. So I really appreciate your attendance and the participation at this panel. It's my pleasure to greet distinguished guests on the second panel, Mr. Tiago Antunes, Secretary of State of the Portuguese Republic. Mrs. Teresa Czerwinska, Vice President of European Investment Bank, Mr. Ulrich Knudsen, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Mr. Nasser Kamel, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. Yeah. Mrs. Mailinda Bregu, Secretary General of the Regional Cooperation Council. Mr. Carlos San Basilio, Managing Director for Corporate Strategy at EBRD. Carlos. And Mr. Serjan Kerim, President of Center for European Cooperation and Conferences. And next, 45 minutes. Our time of the panel is a little bit shorter than it was expected. We will hear our guests' perspective on the multiple crises we're facing now and their interdependencies. After COVID crisis, now we're facing war and global security crisis, food security crisis, energy crisis as well. And on top of that, all other issues that we're normally facing. So it's quite a challenging times. The world showed in history that or the people show that we're able to adapt fast, and I believe that even though the difficulties seem hard and unpredictable, we as the civilization will be able to go through these hard times and continue with the path of prosperity and values that we cherished over the centuries. So I'll start with my colleague from the OECD. Even before the war in Ukraine, we started to see the inflation rising, disruption of the supply chains, problems in production. What is the OECD's perspective on the economic impact of the war in Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much. And you're right that we did see some tendencies to supply chain bottlenecks and inflation before the war. But basically, the world economy was on a recovery path after the corona crisis when war struck on the 24th of February and Russia started this unjustifiable, unprovoked attack against Ukraine. And really, the war has then now caused a very, very severe slowdown in this recovery. We are now predicting global economic growth this year around 3%, next year around 2.8%. But before the war, our outlook was actually 1.5% higher. This is all due to the war in Ukraine. It's true that there were some warning signs before, but the war has certainly aggravated that. And we are now in a state of what some have called permanent crisis or polycrisis. You mentioned some of them. We had the inflation to deal with. We had the economic crisis. Now we have war, food security crisis, energy crisis. We're still not out of the corona crisis, believe it or not. And then, of course, we have the crisis that we keep forgetting. It keeps being only the second most urgent crisis for policymakers, which is the climate crisis. And I fear that the combined effect of these crises is that, if you also take in the geopolitical aspect, that the world could come down a path of decoupling, which would make it even worse to get back to growth. And in fact, it could induce a recession. It'll make it even more difficult to cooperate on climate change. And of course, even worse than that, if we reduce the interdependency of our economies, the political tensions that are threatening to turn into military tensions could become something we don't have a lid on. So I can only say that we at the OECD agree 100% with Prime Minister Plenković this morning when he said that the solution to all of this is multilateral cooperation. There is no alternative to it. I know for some of us it is a view, it is also maybe a political instinct, but if we think about solving the climate change crisis, you know, battling inflation in an internationally economically coordinated manner, if we want to solve the food crisis, if we want to solve the energy crisis, there really is no alternative to international cooperation. It's not a political view, it's a fact simply. No country, not Croatia, not the EU as a whole, not even the OECD as a whole can solve this. So multilateralism, we have to save as much of it as we can. I think there are very, very difficult times ahead of us for multilateralism. I don't think it'll be easy. But this is sort of the combined economic and political effects of the crisis that we're seeing now. I'll say just a little bit perhaps also about the food security crisis, because these supply chain bottlenecks that we're seeing, we are actually risking that a few months down the line we'll have more, you know, children and people dying in Africa's Horn from the war in Ukraine than in Donbass. That's the irony of this. And one more thing, perhaps before I stop. This is also a war and a crisis that's deepening inequalities around the world, within countries and between countries. It's the poorest countries that are paying the biggest price here, because it's such a, you know, it's the share of their consumption basket is just bigger when it comes to oil, when it comes to gas, when it comes to food, than it is for the rich within countries. But also among countries, this is the same effect. And then, perhaps if we look at it continentally, of course, Europe is more at risk than any other continent, because we're closer to Russia and Ukraine in terms of economic ties and trade, and we also have the refugee crisis that so many countries in this region of the world is battling. So this is a dire multiple crisis, and there really is only one way to end it, and that is for Putin to stop this war. We've said that repeatedly. If we can't persuade him to do it, the best we can do is provide tight sanctions that will at least halt his financing of this war.
Okay, thank you. You're right. The multilateral framework is definitely the best way forward to find a solution for this crisis. And as you mentioned, rich countries or the developed countries don't feel the consequences at the moment. In Croatia, we have the highest employment ever. I just saw last night the news from the United States, and President Biden said that the creation of new jobs were over the expectations, and they have the highest employment ever as well. Yeah. So I hope it's not gonna be like the early 2020 when you have, you know, January, February, and first half of March as a record numbers in many fields, and then, you know, the lockdowns and COVID and quarantines came in effect, and, you know, after a huge jump, you got downward. Teresa, European Investment Bank is one of the highest creditors, biggest creditors, not just in Europe, but other continents as well. And you have pretty good diagnostics or overview of the economic situation and the trends. The war in Ukraine resulted in a major humanitarian crisis, and how is it affecting the European Investment Bank, and what is the bank's response to the war?
Thank you, Minister, very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here in Dubrovnik today and to take part and contribute to discussions on very, very important topics. As you said, let me start with the most terrible crisis, the war in Ukraine, which is absolutely unjustified Russian aggression, and we see the tragedy of millions of people. So European Investment Bank's reaction to the war was quick and sizable. We threw all our resources at work one day. The war began. We reacted immediately. And the EIB managed to rapidly deploy 668 million euros to the Ukrainian government for urgent liquidity needs, with a further 1.5 billion euros to invest for rebuilding what the Russian army destroys. In addition to that, we dedicate additional 2.5 million euros humanitarian aid package coordinated by the EIB Institute to directly help people affected by the war. But of course, we understand that the consequences of the war, as you said, are much broader. So we also approved a dedicated package, Ukraine Solidarity Package, dedicated to the member states, which is 4 billion euros to support member states receiving refugees and prepare for receiving them shelters, housing, medical services, educational services, etc. Everything which is needed to receive refugees. So this financial package will be complemented by the EIB advisory support, thanks to the Embrace Advisory Platform, which is a new initiative by the EIB and the European Commission. And through this Embrace platform, EU member states can receive targeted advisory assistance to rapidly deploy investments, projects, and instruments that support their communities. Of course, it is one part of our response to this terrible tragedy. But another part of response, it is that it is not too early to start thinking about recovery and rebuilding of Ukraine. And once the war is over, so the challenge will be immense, and we as the EU bank, together with our global partners, international financial institutions and supporters of Ukraine, we should be ready for it. So EIB stands ready to provide its experience, capacity and know-how to help Ukraine to develop its rebuilding strategy, and I participated in the conference in Lugano Monday this week. So Ukrainian government presented some strategy to rebuild Ukraine after the war, and I'm proud that European Investment Bank could support this strategy and this Lugano Declaration. So in this spirit, European Investment Bank is ready to offer to set up an EU-Ukraine Gateway Trust Fund that would provide mechanism to facilitate the EU's reconstruction efforts. It would be additional mechanism, additional financial instrument under umbrella of European Union platform, and this fund could be deployed in support of both the public and private sector projects alike. So we are looking for cooperation, and as my previous speaker said, cooperation is the name of the game. So we are looking for further cooperation to international institutions, member states, but also other donors to contribute to this fund, because we need to stay united. We need to coordinate our efforts to cope with this huge, immense in size tragedy. So I think that this instrument would be very helpful to mobilize public financing for Ukraine, which is absolutely crucial to reconstruct and to rebuild. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Tiago, Portugal is further away from the conflict zone, so definitely the situation in Ukraine doesn't look the same from Warsaw as it does from Lisbon. And what could be some ways, but however we're in this as the EU together, what could be some ways to cut off dependencies on the Russian gas and oil, and also on Ukrainian wheat and sunflower or fertilizers as well?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. Well, I would say, first of all, the European Union should not have allowed itself to be so heavily dependent on Russian fossil fuels. This was a huge mistake. It obviously creates difficulties and hardship, and we need to fix it. We need to change that. It obviously limits our ability to respond to Russia. Even so, we have managed to adopt already 6 packages of sanctions. This was very positive. This is something probably Putin did not expect, that the European Union remained united and unanimously already managed to adopt 6 packages of sanctions, strong sanctions. But even having said that, obviously the dependence on fossil fuels, on gas particularly, creates limits our ability to respond in an even stronger way. So we need to fix that. I believe that's clear to everyone at the moment. It's a big priority for Europe. It's clearly stated in the European Commission's plan, Repower EU, and we need to cut this dependency from Russia. So going back to Portugal now, to your question, we are very far away geographically, but so we don't have this problem of depending on Russian fossil fuels. Of course, we suffer the effects of inflation, mounting prices, but we don't depend on Russian coal or oil at all, and we buy just a very small share of Russian gas, which you can replace very easily. So we don't have, in terms of security of supply, we don't have this problem, but we want to be part of the solution to the problem. And how can Portugal, so far away, be part of the solution to the problem? Well, it's really a no-brainer. If we are looking to an alternative to energy coming from the east, from Russia, then we need to look to the west as a port of entry for energy products into Europe. And Portugal and Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, have great conditions. We have our, I know that Croatia is very proud of its LNG terminal. It's very important that you have one. We have an LNG terminal in Portugal. Spain has 6 other LNG terminals, so we have 7 throughout the Iberian Peninsula. And so we can be, if we need to diversify suppliers, sources, and routes, then look to the west. What's the problem then? The problem is that we then need interconnections to take this. For the moment, in the long run, in the short run, we can be an alternative source of supply for LNG, for natural gas. But of course, it's only a transition fuel. And so in the future, we need to consider renewable gases like hydrogen, green hydrogen. And again, Portugal has a huge potential. We have a lot of sun, we have a lot of water. We can produce hydrogen in a very cost-effective way. And we would like to be able to be suppliers of this green and cheap energy. And for that, again, we need interconnections. So this is recognized in the Repower EU. It has been also recognized in the European Council conclusions. And our focus is on interconnections because at the moment, the Iberian Peninsula is almost not connected with Europe in terms of energy. So we're kind of an energy island. And it doesn't make sense because we have a huge untapped potential in terms of our infrastructure of terminals for LNG and in future hydrogen, as I mentioned, and we should be able to export that into the European Union. And for that, we will only have a true European energy market if our member states are interconnected, both in terms of electricity and in terms of gas. Otherwise, it's not really a full-fledged European internal market for energy. And we need that. If we are to cut our dependency on Russia, we need to have a full-scale, interconnected European energy market, and that's where we need to invest. We need the resources, many resources of the EIB, of other international banks, of the European Union. We need to scale up our investment in infrastructure, which has to be already H2-ready, future-proof infrastructure so that we'll have a sound, sustainable, green energy infrastructure and truly a European energy market, truly interconnected. That's the only way we are going to solve this problem.
Okay, thank you, Tiago. This leads the way to our next panelist, Carlos. As the EIB, EBRD is also a huge creditor, and it's also a development bank. And so our dependence on fossil fuels has been more than evident. And what we as the EU and countries individually, like the example of Portugal we just heard, can do in order to make this green transition faster?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, from our side in EBRD, the green transition is at the core of our strategy. It has been for several years already. So already 50% of our total investment. And I want to remember that to remind everyone that EBRD is active in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Northern Africa. So we've been extending all the way to Mongolia to the east and Northern Africa to the south. And 50% of our investment is green finance, 100% of our investment is Paris aligned. And what we see is that this current crisis, the crisis triggered by the war by Russia, is having an effect which is some sort of a paradox. Because on one hand, it is strengthening the case for transition, for moving to renewables. But at the same time, is putting a lot of pressure on authorities in the very short term to take immediate action to respond to higher prices and disruption in energy supply chain. And sometimes this has led to some authorities to go back to even to coal, but also to look for alternatives from gas in the gas market itself. So not replacing it by renewables, because it will take time before renewables can really fully substitute the provision of gas, but for LNG or for other suppliers. And what are we doing, and what do we get from our clients? We get this same paradox. So we are getting a lot of demand for credit, for liquidity and for working capital to take immediate action. And here we are responding. We're responding everywhere in our region of operations, even in Ukraine, even these days in Ukraine under the war, because Ukraine was one of the top 3 countries of operations of the EBRD. We have been investing roughly $1 billion per year for the last few years. We have a team of 100 people there based in Kiev who have now been moved to Warsaw and are doing their work from there. But we keep engaging with our clients in Ukraine. And on the energy sector is where we keep on investing the most. We have kind of a commitment from agreed with our shareholders that this year, even under the current circumstances, we will invest €1 billion in Ukraine. In this case, with a 50% guarantee provided by our shareholders. And the focus is actually in energy. The biggest tickets we have seen so far are mostly with Naftogaz, with Ukrenergo. So it's the energy environment which is requiring the biggest funding. Also other areas that you can that we will talk about later. We have time, like agribusiness, because the food industry is also in severe stress. But what we are doing is that we are complementing this investment in short-term needs, in liquidity and working capital in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, with a strong involvement and engagement with the countries in strengthening their transition strategies. So we are at the same time investing in much longer term projects, for instance, associated with green hydrogen. And here we're working, for instance, with Egypt, also in cooperation with the Commission, and we hope we can make some progress in the coming years, because some of these countries, also for instance Morocco, will have a lot of opportunities in this environment. We're also working with our countries of operations in trying to redesign the map of pipelines in Europe that have been consistently east to west, and that now will have to go also north-south or south-north more clearly. And here, for instance, we've been working also with your authorities here in Croatia with regards to the Kirk terminal, with the LNG terminal. And this is the easiest part, because that's where you can step up the capacity of the terminal pretty easily with some funding. But the difficult part is then to go all the way with the pipelines going north with all the interconnections. And here there's going to be a need of a huge investment. And I'm sure that here, again, as in many other projects, we will partner also with the EIB and with the Commission to try to reshape the map in energy map in Europe in the coming months and years. So it is a lot of stress under which we are going now. We're going to have some more stress in months and years to come. But to a certain extent, I think that the war will have on the green transition a similar impact that as COVID has had in digitalization, which is to accelerate a process that was already inevitable, but now even seems that we have a stronger case. And financial institutions, we have to be there, particularly those that have this development tag. And also because we are the ones that can also be more effective in mobilizing private sector resources, which are going to be also needed for the huge amount of funds that are going to be required in the green transition in the short term and in the medium term.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Nasser, let's go back to the issue of food security. The war in Ukraine has made the threat of the world hunger even worse, especially in the global south. What are the steps that we can do in order to mitigate these risks?
Well, let me start by thanking you and the Foreign Minister. This is my third edition at the Dubrovnik Forum, so it has become a classic for me. I'm very happy to be here. Also, on a footnote, the Union for the Mediterranean has been one of the promoters of the initiative of No Women, No Panel. So we refuse to participate in any panel when there is no ladies in that panel, which is, I believe, is very important. On the issue of food security, yes, the Global South and even the neighborhood, and by neighborhood I mean the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, are facing insurmountable problems in terms of supplies of grain. Almost the whole region is heavily dependent on import of grains from Ukraine and Russia primarily, and other sources. Egypt 80%, Turkey 70%, Lebanon 90%, Israel, Turkey. Not one single country in the southern Mediterranean is not dependent on imports, and on imports specifically from those two suppliers. And their capacity to produce is quite limited. This is one of the poorest regions in terms of water resource, and the incentive, the economic incentive to shift some of the agricultural activity to wheat production was not there for the last few years, and it's very difficult to design and reorient the agricultural sectors so they can adapt with the current crisis. That means that 1 million more citizens in that region would be added to the list of undernourished population. We're talking about 1 billion worldwide who are facing hunger because of COVID combined with the Ukrainian crisis. So what do we do to mitigate this challenge? Well, you have the short term, immediate action to take, and then you have the medium and long-term approach. On the short term, let's start, and I go back to my very dear friend from OECD, multilateralism. We have seen in the beginning of the crisis in Ukraine some policies, including in the EU, where country had a tendency to store grain instead of releasing them. And we've seen it across the board at an international level. And that's dangerous because the geopolitical ramification coming from the MENA region could be actually quite dangerous for Europe. So we need to do, let's not make the same mistake we made with COVID when vaccines were concentrated in a very few number of countries against the rest of the world. So we need to adopt open policy, stop with export controls on grain. I'm not talking about Europe, I'm talking about India. in order to at least secure a minimum amount of supplies. Luckily, this year, grain crop worldwide has been a good one. Australia, record production. India has done a good season. Western Europe has done well. Even we've seen last week the grain prices slightly going down, but we are at 55% increase in prices. So on the short term, less export control. Number two, dealing with the waste, especially in the global south, because of bad storage. And this could be done quickly with the help of EBRD, or with the help of development agency from Germany, Italy, France. These are easy and quick project to implement, because in some countries the waste can go up to 60% of the wheat. So we have to work in this line. Third, of course, provide the most vulnerable segment of the population with financial incentive. I mean, a social safety net that will definitely protect them from falling into undernourishment or even hunger. On the medium to long term, so many things. One is, of course, encouraging our rural people in our rural area to maintain their activity by creating jobs for the youth in this region, giving them more economic opportunity so we can preserve our agricultural base in Europe and in the MENA region. So we decrease our dependence on imported grain. Two, and you refer to it, climate change, because climate change is impacting. I mean, northern Italy has declared a water emergency. Northern Italy, not southern Italy, meaning less. France, Le Figaro yesterday, was talking about the driest summer ever in France. And I'm not talking about Egypt or Morocco or Tunisia or Algeria. So we need to start working on the nexus between science, meaning research, adaptation to climate, and agriculture, to be able to create crops that are resistant, that are adaptable to the new reality, the unfortunate reality of climate change, and to be able to yield the needed amounts of foodstuff that could have, or could at least alleviate the situation and increase our food security region-wise. And I will end by saying multilateralism and regional cooperation is not a luxury, is extremely important for the stability and the geopolitical stability of that region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nasser. Melinda, RCC serves regional cooperation and European integration of the Southeast Europe. And regarding what Nasser just said, how the food security or food scarcity and energy scarcity can influence further political instabilities, especially in the lower income regions, and how we can mitigate these risks.
Well, thank you very much again for the invitation. So it looks like it will be a tradition for me as well. So this is the second time that I'm attending the Dubrovnik Forum, and it's always lovely to come back in here. So first and foremost, I would apologize. I'm not an expert on energy, and I wouldn't really like to use my opportunity in here in discussing about the dangerous situation that the Western Balkans will be facing, not only on energy and food security, but mostly starting from that, let's say, raw fear of insecurity that is present already in this region. Less than 2 weeks ago, we launched two surveys that we commission each year. One is the Balkan Barometer and the other one is the Securimeter. And by the Securimeter, we tend to reach the citizens and measure their sense regarding the security situation in their own economies and their own countries. And this year we noticed with worry that there is like a decrease of 10%, so 46% of citizens in the Western Balkans. This year they feel more afraid. And considering that this like a human peculiarity that people live in the future, these fears for us constitute like the raw material, if said so, like not only like in the concrete and literally meaning of raw material, of what this region is facing and has to deal with. Like the insecurity from the fear of the war that can be extended in the region, that of the high prices, like the inflation and the skyrocketing prices, and as well the fear that the citizens have as well, that their future and the level of their the increasing unemployment is going to ruin their lives. So in terms of what is happening in regard with the war that is sending the shocking waves in this region, just one simple comparison. You already know like the economic figures, but consider that last year the Western Balkans managed to recuperate after the pandemic. It reached the level of GDP growth at 7.4%. And now all the baseline projections are that it will decrease again at the level of 3.1%. Consider that the region of the Western Balkans has like different levels of compounded problems. One, and that's why I said I'm not an expert, but I have to like to spin a bit on the political situation. One, the biggest problem now is the story of the non-enlargement. EU is losing its geopolitical strategy by non-deciding how to progress in the story of enlargement of the Western Balkans, of EU with the Western Balkans. If we would really like to put it in a raw language, it's losing its piece of land. Because people in this region, like those youngsters that Nasser mentioned as well, are living day by day. 49% of them are ready to leave if an immediate offer is given to them. This is a very big problem. Secondly, the Western Balkans is still looking forward to receive and be a receiver of the security imported from abroad. The third one is a receiver of gas, cheap gas, coming from Russia, or at least that was the situation so far. And then having as well a lot during the last years of Chinese investments and projects with due respect, but as well, you know that the countries of this region are not as rich as to afford the debt that is skyrocketing. And here again, I will come back. So what might be like three main lines that I would like to leave you at this panel. First, that multilateralism and regional cooperation are quite important. That is not a story anymore of cherry picking, pick and choose. No one in the Western Balkans can really do well alone, like with all these problems that the region will be facing with the less wheat production. You know that Albania, North Macedonia, has been the countries where wheat was mostly imported from Ukraine and Russia. Some of the countries of the region are totally, or let's say more than 63% dependent from Russian gas. But are the economies of the Western Balkans really capable to buy and purchase all the other forms, gas as well, but as well to build a greener energy based on what the richness of this region is? No, it's going to be too difficult. So multilateralism, international and regional cooperation. Second, putting Western Balkans again from now onset in all the EU policies, be it as it was rightly decided in the purchase of gas, be it as well on trying to limit the use of the fossil fuel in our economies. You know that in this region, and the winter that is coming, and this is not only a quote from Game of Thrones, but winter is coming. Winter that is coming, it's going to be hard. We are working on a green agenda on the Western Balkans, we at RCC. But frankly, I dare to challenge myself. What can we do on a green agenda in the Western Balkans, where there are more than 17 hazardous coal plants that harm even more than 62 plants in the European Union? And can any politician in the region be bold enough as to say, yes, guys, my dear voters, you'll be suffering during the winter because I have a Green Deal that I have to respect. So no coal or fossil fuel will be burned during the winter. So keep your kids at home, schools will be cold, because I have to respect the Green Deal. This is going to be hard as well to be respected. And that's why the investment on the green energy has to start. Well, it should have started yesterday, but it's going to take a long road to hoe. It's not going to be a shortcut. And the third one, when we speak of more regional cooperation, we all know that Southeast Europe, but especially in the Western Balkans, every day we produce more politics that we can really, or that can really be edible for us. We know as well that there is a division among the economies in the region. We know that history still plays its role in here. And we know that our economies are not strong. But if we will not commit ourselves to grow stronger ties and to deepen the economic integration, and even when it comes to the energy or the supply of energy, to have one regional approach, then it's going to be even more difficult. And the fears will be even lower in the next season. So these are like the three main worries that I wanted to share with you. But you can again, so you can enrich the list with your expertise. Political instability is one of the big worries in the region. We don't have only a problem now, or one of the economies of the region that is facing the biggest problems is Bosnia and Herzegovina, but we have a new situation that is like pretty dangerous now in North Macedonia. We don't know what's going to happen in the next month again, and it might be that fall time might again bring a new difficult political moment in this region. And I'll stop here. I don't know if I really answered to your questions about food security or energy security.
There are other issues as well. Thank you, Melinda. Srdjan, the center you're presiding aims to protect democracies and EU values, something that is really challenged these days. What are the implications of the global crisis, especially in the market of raw materials, on geopolitics and geoeconomics?
Thank you, dear Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, 90% of the people here at this forum are diplomats, and the rest are people whose job is related to diplomacy. It's very simple. Diplomacy is about preserving peace and security in this world and to create a world order. The world is in a total disorder. Why? Exactly because of all the questions you have raised now in your previous interventions. There is such a dramatic discrepancy between geopolitics on one side and geoeconomics on the other side. That has never been the case, even not during the Cold War. You are younger, most of you don't remember. Even during the Cold War and the Cuban crisis, when we were on the eve of the Third World War, there were barters of billions of dollars, grain for oil, between the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact and the NATO countries and the United States. Even then. What's going on today? I'm afraid we are heading in the opposite direction. The last 30 years, we are witnessing geoeconomics prevailing towards, in comparison with geopolitics. Look at globalization, of the progress of ICTs, of multilateral trade arrangements, free trade arrangements, economy of scale, and these famous global supply chains which were mentioned. All that brought the world into an interdependent situation. Due to that, the share of trade in the global GDP has risen within these 30 years from 37 to 61%. Now, we are heading in the opposite direction. Geopolitics, and that's one of the bitter lessons from the war of Ukraine, and also from the COVID-19 crisis, where there was no multilateralism at all. It doesn't exist. It's out. So, and it's not by chance that you are talking about economic issues and concrete short-term decisions, but you cannot resist not to mention multilateralism, because that's the core of the problem. So we need to do first to reinvent globalization with a dimension of security plus, in order to avoid the abuse of geoeconomics for geopolitical purposes. That's also one of the bitter lessons of this war in the Ukraine. Who guarantees that tomorrow, if this continues this way, that there will be not a war about the Arctic? For the same reasons, because the war in the Ukraine is not only about territories and Nazis and so, that's for children. That's propaganda, cheap propaganda, and stories for children. For us who have been 50 years in this business, that's not serious. We know exactly what is the background of it. An attempt to transform the rivalry and the opposition of the leading role of the United States by Russia and China into a completely different order. That has implications and will have implications on geoeconomics. Listen, countries like Germany, Italy, and not to continue the list, they're stretched now within this situation between the one and the other. Geopolitically, there is no dilemma for them where they belong to. But geoeconomics dictates something else. To talk how the disrupted global supply channels will be resolved, I'm not so sure as an economist that that works like Aladdin's lamp. Not at all. On the contrary, it's a very serious, difficult process. It's a mission impossible. China controls 1/3 of the global supply chains. In the basic industries, in chemicals, I don't need to tell that here. I have experts from the OECD, from the banks, you know it much better into details. I know it because I'm following it professionally. All these elements tell us what? We have to combine the three elements. First, to reinvent globalization. Second, to revitalize multilateralism. And third, to reshape seriously international institutions. If we want to be, as a forum, more attractive, not only for the media, but for the public, we have to come out with something which is not only discussing the short-run decisions which are legitimate, and I have nothing to say, no remarks, nothing. On the contrary, I would do the same if I was in a position to do it. But let's think in terms of the long run. In terms of the long run, I would not recommend to prevail with discussions about ideologies. 4 billion people live under autocracies. That's a matter of fact. Democracy has never been imposed. Nazism and communism were systems which were imposed to others, and they failed in a catastrophe. That has history shown. Democracy comes bottom up in each country and corner of the world. And that's not at stake now. What is at stake now is, are we heading towards a third world war if we continue this way, or are we going to match eco-politics and geopolitics? That's the issue. And I have even a concrete proposal. I dare to go that far. Maybe it will sound provocative, maybe not. Why not to convene, and to suggest, to appeal, to have a joint session of the Security Council with the G20? That has never happened, but it makes sense because the Security Council is in charge of geopolitics and the G20 of geoeconomics. Why don't they meet on the foreign ministers level and start talking about all these issues, including the implications on climate change, because all these countries have agreed in Paris 7 years ago what are the common goals. Why not to put pandemics also as a, we have to find common denominators where dialogue can be reinvented. Without that, it's a dialogue of the deaf, and I'm afraid we are heading towards an even more dangerous situation, and all our discussions will be meaningless if that happens.
Okay. Thank you, Sergio. A similar question I was planned to ask Ulrich, but now we're a little bit short on time. You wanted to add something, Ulrich?
Well, it seems winter certainly is coming in every sense of it. No, I'll be very brief. We haven't talked so much about the raw power of raw materials, which was the title of this panel. But I'd like to just perhaps add one remark on the raw brain power on this panel. Not perhaps so much the people on the stage, although I have a high esteem for my colleagues, but the raw power, the raw brain power behind the international organizations represented in this panel, because I think it is tremendously important that we have a conversation about how we can best help Ukraine and thereby perhaps best help Western values and the values that we're trying to defend. And as the Ukrainian foreign minister said this morning, they are actually fighting for our values. And I think there are three principles here that we should keep in mind as international organizations and banks when we try to apply our raw brain power to help Ukraine. One is that we have to be collaborative. I think that's the first one. The second one is we have to see what are the comparative advantages of each organization, because we're different. For us, that means analytical work. It means recommendations, sharing our best practices, in some instances, perhaps even some capacity building. And then the third and most important principle, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Ukraine has to have ownership and leadership as we try to help them. And then I'll go one better than Nasa and Mylinda. Nasa said it was his third meeting here, and he's making it a tradition. Mylinda, you said it was your second meeting, and you're making it a tradition. This is my first meeting here. I already consider it a tradition. So thanks for the invitation.
Well, just to reiterate what you just said. We've been talking about multilateralism and raw material, energy transition or energy at large, and also food security. We should, not because I'm heading a regional organization, but we should also pay attention to regionalization, because solution also could be found within a larger regional context. And when I say regional, I mean the EU, its eastern neighborhood, and its southern neighborhood. And even beyond, I would even go all the way to sub-Saharan Africa. Because we have seen the limit of globalization. I'm not saying the end of globalization. We have seen the limit of globalization. And we are seeing that other regions are actually working together to deal with some of the pressing challenge in today's world. So if you are really serious about energy transition or even energy independence, I don't see it happening without the Southern Mediterranean being engaged. Portugal has enormous potential, Spain, Italy, but frankly, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt has even more potential because land is free to produce wind. Sorry to say that, but there is a problem of land when you produce solar in Europe. There is no problem of land when you produce solar or wind in the Southern Mediterranean. Green hydrogen, this whole new spectrum, but that needs, as my dear colleague, the Secretary of State of Portugal, that needs connectivity, interoperability, infrastructure, and we haven't done it. So if Europe really is looking for energy independence, they need to invest in their neighborhood and in their southern region to make sure that they can reach neutrality by 2030 and zero emission by 2050. I'll have to leave because the Greek foreign minister is waiting for me outside. And my pay grade does not allow me to make him waiting.
Yeah,
so I will.
Thank you very much. Before I conclude, I would like to thank everybody for listening. I would like to especially thank my panelists for wonderful remarks. It's been a pleasure to moderate this panel, and thank you all for coming. We heard that the energy situation or energy supply and the inflation and food security and are mounting up on the top of the common problems we're already facing, and different institutions, different people from different regions, of course, have different views on potential solution for these issues. We expect that the world economy, even though it is hard time, the winter is coming, it's going to be harder for everybody as well, should rebound fast and be able to dodge the bullet of recession or stagflation. And it's challenging, of course, to stick to your values, to stick to your priorities, but we believe that our economies will overpass these challenges, and the future going to be brighter than it looks at the moment. Thank you very much, and thank you all for participation. Thank you.